I still remember the thin air that morning, how it felt sharp and alive, almost electric, as I climbed the last stretch of the ridge. My breath came out in little clouds that vanished before my eyes, swallowed by the freezing dawn wind. I'd been hiking for 4 days into the Bitterroot Range, chasing a single goal: to capture the mating flight of the Himalayan snow partridge, an almost mythic bird said to nest once every decade on this side of the range. It was the kind of shot that could define a career, the kind people printed on glossy covers or hung in museum halls. I'd studied the migration routes, the rare weather patterns, the timing of first light. Everything had led me here. But the mountain didn't care about my plans. The wind roared so fiercely it tugged at my pack straps, whistling through the guy lines of my tent far below. Every rock underfoot seemed eager to roll away, and I could already feel my fingers stiffening despite my gloves. My camera, an old beloved DSLR I'd carried for years, banged softly against my chest with each step. Inside, my heart was pounding harder than the gusts. I was close now. The cliff face ahead was where I'd seen the faint white streaks of guano through my telephoto lens the day before. Nesting signs, proof they were here. The first light hit just as I crested the ridge. A cold fire spread across the granite walls, painting the peaks in gold and blood orange. My tripod legs bit into the crusted snow while I steadied the camera, breath held, every nerve alive. I adjusted the settings by feel. Aperture, ISO, shutter speed. My mind rehearsed them like prayer. Somewhere below, a sharp, haunting call echoed, rising into the wind like a flute note. I froze. That was it, the partridge's cry. I edged closer to the cliff, crouched behind a rock spattered with lichen. My lens swept the slope below. And then I saw them. 2 pale shapes gliding against the wind, their wings catching the morning sun in flashes of silver and white. They were magnificent. Perfect. Every instinct screamed to lift the camera, to press the shutter. But then I noticed something else. Their nest clung precariously to a ledge dusted with snow, fragile and exposed. Any movement from me, any vibration from a misplaced step, could send it tumbling. The wind shifted, bringing the faint scent of feathers and rock dust. My heart pounded harder. I crouched lower, weighing the choice that had haunted me since I'd started this track. Do I risk disturbing them for the perfect shot? Or let the moment pass, unseen, unclaimed? The partridges circled once, calling again, and my hands trembled on the camera. I knew whatever I did next would change everything. For a long moment I didn't move at all. The wind howled around me, rattling the tripod, tugging at my jacket like a living thing. I could feel the cold biting into my knees through the snow, the ache starting in my hands. Down below, the partridges had landed, vanishing into the rocky ledge that held their nest, a fragile bowl of feathers and moss clinging to a few inches of stone. The mother shifted inside it, her plumage so perfectly matched to the cliff that she was almost invisible until she moved. I lowered the camera for a second and just watched. The scene was beautiful, sacred in a way, so untouched that even the sound of my breathing felt like a trespass. I'd come all this way for a photograph, but now that I was here, I felt like I was intruding on something I didn't deserve to see. Still, the professional part of me pushed forward. My sponsors had paid for the permit. My audience was waiting online for the shot of a lifetime. I could almost see the caption now. The phantom birds of the Bitterroot Peaks. It would make my career, pay for years of field work. I crept a few feet closer, planting each step gently, testing the snow for hidden ice. The tripod legs scraped softly against a stone, and I flinched at the sound. A faint rustle came from the ledge. One of the birds raised its head alert. My pulse hammered. I froze again. For what felt like an eternity, the bird stared toward me, then settled back into stillness. I exhaled and adjusted my lens to full zoom. Through the viewfinder, I could see the intricate detail of their feathers, like layers of snow and smoke woven together. My hands steadied the camera. I adjusted the focus, felt the shutter button under my finger. Just one press, I told myself. One image. I could retreat right after, no harm done. But as I framed the shot, I saw that the wind was picking up. Tiny avalanches of powder slipped down the slope, and a few loose pebbles tumbled past the nest. One more vibration might be enough to dislodge it. My finger hovered, trembling. The cold metal of the camera felt heavier than ever, as if it were asking me to choose between beauty and responsibility. Behind me, the sky had turned a deeper blue, the sun climbing higher. I knew I didn't have long. The light was perfect now. In a few minutes, it would flatten, the shadows fading. Every muscle in my body screamed to take the picture, and yet I couldn't shake the thought that one frame might cost those birds their clutch, their future. The silence stretched between us, thick as ice. I shut my eyes, trying to remember why I'd started photographing nature in the first place, and realized it wasn't for fame, but for reverence. I eased back from the cliff edge, heart still hammering in my chest. The crunch of my boots in the snow felt deafening in that thin, high silence. I didn't stop until I'd put a dozen careful yards between me and the ledge. Then I sank to one knee beside a boulder streaked with frost. My breath came out in quick bursts, part fear, part relief. I'd done the right thing, or at least I hoped I had. But as I stared down at the camera in my hands, the weight of all those lost possibilities pressed hard on me. The perfect light was still spilling across the peaks, gilding the rocks and the clouds with fire. And I was standing here empty-handed. I tried to shake off the thought and turned my lens toward the horizon instead. Maybe I could capture something else, something that spoke to the feeling rather than the sight. I started snapping shots of the vast expanse of ridges, the way the sunlight cut through a curtain of wind-blown snow. Each frame was crisp, beautiful, and utterly ordinary. Nothing close to what I'd come for. I adjusted settings, crawled to different angles, even used my gloves as makeshift filters, but none of it worked. Every image felt hollow, like taking pictures of echoes. That's when the tripod slipped. The ground beneath it, softened by the sun, gave way and sent one leg sliding. The whole rig tipped, and I lunged to grab it. My glove caught the strap just in time, but the motion threw my balance. I fell forward, sliding a few feet before my boots dug into the snow. Pebbles scattered down the slope below, bouncing dangerously close to the ledge where the partridges nested. My heart stopped. I held still, barely breathing. Down below, one of the birds burst from the nest, wings flaring wide in alarm. It circled once, twice, before settling again beside its mate. I waited for what felt like minutes before daring to move. My stomach twisted. Even that small accident, a slip, a reflex, had nearly undone everything I'd sworn to protect. I checked the camera. The lens was scratched, but intact. The image that flashed on the tiny screen was a blur of sky and light. An accident, but strangely haunting. Maybe that was fitting. Maybe nature didn't owe me its secrets, no matter how much I chased them. Still, as I brushed snow from the camera and steadied the tripod again, I couldn't help glancing back toward that ledge. The mother bird was still there, feathers ruffled, eyes bright. She didn't know or care about careers, deadlines, or sponsors. She only cared for her nest. I felt a sting of humility, deep and cold as the mountain air. For the first time in years, I wondered if capturing beauty could ever justify risking it. By midday, the wind had mellowed into a steady hiss across the snowfields, and the light lost its early gold, turning stark and white. I sat against the boulder, cradling my dented camera, thinking about the moment I'd nearly caused harm without meaning to. It would have taken just one wrong slip to undo a decade of natural instinct those birds relied on. I stared at the cracked lens, then at the wide, empty valley below, and felt something like shame creeping up my throat. All the planning, the money, the ambition. What did it matter if it came at the cost of what I claimed to love? I reached into my pack and pulled out my small backup camera, an old, weather-worn compact model I always carried just in case. It wasn't built for this kind of distance or detail, but it was quiet, light, and unassuming. I swapped memory cards, turned it on, and took a few slow, cautious steps toward a different vantage point, one that kept me far enough from the nest that even my shadow wouldn't touch it. The zoom was weak, the image fuzzy through the viewfinder, but that was all right. I wasn't chasing perfection anymore. I watched the partridges for a while, letting the camera rest against my chest. The mother preened her feathers. The male hopped along the ridge, pecking at stray tufts of grass poking through the snow. I snapped a few frames without moving closer, careful and patient. The pictures were distant, their details swallowed by air and light, but they captured something more honest than any portrait I'd ever taken. The quiet persistence of life that carried on whether or not anyone was watching. As the afternoon deepened, clouds gathered over the peaks, dragging shadows down into the valleys. I knew I had to descend before the storm reached me. I broke down the tripod, packed the cameras, and looked back one last time. The nest was still there, fragile, perfect, and safe. I felt the same kind of reverence I'd felt years ago when I took my first photograph of a wild creature. That simple awe of being allowed to witness, not to claim. On the way down, I stopped by a small stream, scooped up icy water with my hands and splashed my face. The cold burned, but it cleared my head. My reflection rippled in the water. Tired eyes, sunburned cheeks, a smear of dirt across my nose. I looked like a man who'd lost something important, but gained something truer. Maybe the world didn't need another perfect shot. Maybe it just needed people who could still be humbled by what they saw. When I reached camp that evening, the storm finally broke. Wind thrashing through the pines, snow swirling like ghosts. I crawled into my tent, wrapped my jacket tight, and listened to the roar fade into a steady whisper. Somewhere above, on that exposed ledge, the partridges were huddled against the same storm. The thought made me strangely calm. I didn't have the photograph I came for, but I had something else. The quiet certainty that I'd finally learned what it meant to see without taking. Morning came grey and heavy with mist. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and silent. Every branch dripped with melting frost, and the air carried that faint metallic scent of new snow. I broke camp slowly, more deliberate than usual, packing my gear as though each motion held meaning. When I slung my camera over my shoulder, it felt lighter than it had in days. Not because it weighed less, but because the burden of chasing that one perfect image had slipped away somewhere in the night. The trail wound down through the forest, the ground slick with half-frozen mud. My boots left a chain of prints that the thawing snow quickly softened. Every now and then, I'd pause and listen. To the soft rush of meltwater, to the caw of distant ravens, to the mountains. Deep, breathing stillness. It was as if the world was reminding me that it had been here long before me, and would go on long after I was gone. By the time I reached the valley, the sun had fought through the cloud cover, casting a thin, silvery light across the meadows. I found a fallen log near the river and sat for a while, scrolling through the few photos I'd taken. Most were wide shots, humble things. In one frame, the partridges were barely specks against the cliff, but when I zoomed in, I caught something I hadn't noticed before, the faint shimmer of their wings as they caught the wind together, mid-flight, rising from their ledge. It wasn't sharp, not technically brilliant, but it was alive. I laughed softly, surprising myself. For years I'd measured my worth in pixels and applause, in how perfectly I could trap a moment inside a frame. But sitting there, surrounded by the endless openness of the valley, I realized that no photograph could ever match the real thing. The cold breath of the wind, the tremble of the earth beneath my boots, the sheer luck of being there to see it. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the beauty of nature isn't meant to be captured, only honoured. When I finally started back toward the trailhead, the mist had begun to rise again, curling between the pines like slow smoke. I took one last look at the mountain, its jagged ridges fading into the clouds, and whispered a quiet thanks, both for what it had given me and what it hadn't. Some shots, I thought, aren't meant for cameras at all. They're meant to stay where they belong, in memory, in humility, in the fragile balance between ambition and respect. That night, back in town, I uploaded the images and wrote a short caption beneath the blurred photograph of the two birds. Some moments are too sacred to steal. This is the closest I dared to get. And for once, I didn't care how many people liked it. I just hoped they'd understand.